Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Game of Thrones When It's Coming. In today's episode we're going to have a little bit of a discussion video regarding bows. Bows have been terrorizing the game for probably around the last year or so. They got extremely strong due to some awakenings and other things being added to the game, and that have made a lot of people shift towards bows, and now it seems to be slowly changing away from bows again, and we are going to have a discussion about why and if bow is kind of going out of meta, so we'll jump right into it. Before going super deep into this discussion, we have to kind of look at some things that are just basic things regarding bows and other troops in comparison. As you can see, for T5 bows at least, that the attack is extremely high, while health is somewhat iffy and defense is pretty low. And this has been one of the reasons to why a lot of people have been changing towards bows, because you could stack your castle full and just smack a ton of attack on the bows, and you would be a glass cannon, but you would have a really impossible defense to break through. And because of that, bows have been also used at soloing and doing rallies and so on, because they deal a high amount of damage compared to what others can defend with. For example, if you look at spear, you can see that the attack is slightly lower, but in exchange the health and defense is higher, considerably higher. And the same is it is regarding calf, even though the attack isn't that much different, and same with infantry compared to the bows. You have to kind of put it into perspective, where you might be having 1 million bows towards 1 million infantry, and in that case you can see, okay, you have a bunch of more attack for each bow compared to each infantry, so you will automatically lose a lot more infantry compared to bows in a even state. And because bows do not have any counters or anything like that, they are pretty safe to use, and they were for a long time. You can see it here as well in the type matchup, that each has a counter against them, while bow sitting in the middle has no counter, and that has meant that people had to always have the flexibility, if they were playing one of the others, to be able to switch to cav, inf or spear, while bow could just play bow. And because of that, a lot of people found out that if they specialized in bow, then you would have an automatic advantage, because other people would have to specialize into two different types, which meant that their average stats would be lower and bows could hit a lot harder. And this was a general case for a very long time, until roughly 2 or 3 months ago, when they added the weapons. And we will take a look at the weapons to figure out why they are becoming an issue regarding bows. In the current state of game, we obviously have a bunch of weapons added to the game, and this kind of gives us an idea of what direction they plan to take the game. And that also gives us an idea of how the meta is going to shape up in the foreseeable future. Obviously, you can see that there are a lot of different weapons added, and we have 2 bow weapons. One is for Sorin, which is not a bow weapon at all. It's for a bow commander, but it doesn't really have the bow stats or anything related to it, so it's pretty much not a usable bow weapon at all. And the other one is for Theon, and Theon has the static as 27.5 bow attack, total health, random attributes, special ability upgrade and so on, which is really nice. And you can see that it isn't much different from others that are on the same tier, which means pay to win commander. So the stats match even with that, but as you can see, there are more weapons out already for other commanders than bows, which means that already their bows will have a stat deficit compared to other troops. And not only that, because bows are focused around attack, then this attack stat is fine, but because there are more weapons available for this, then you fall behind in that regard as well, which is the strong point of bows at this point. So now you might think, okay, well, there are lower ranked weapons, which is true. There are, of course, quality weapons from, I believe it's green to gold, and the issue is that there are no weapons for bows in that regard. They are only for inf, calf and spear. And to make matters worse, then when we look at the stats available for reforging, you will notice that there are certain stats that are directly made to counter bows, which is the reduce enemy bow damage against allied infantry troops, cavalry troops or spearmen troops, which is a huge nerf to bows in that regard, because the damage output was what made bows really strong. But with the introductions of weapons, that the fact that the other troop types can catch up in terms of stats, they can add some defensive stats which has higher value at them compared to bows, because bows have the lowest defensive stats in the game, makes it that the bows are starting to fall off because the damage gets reduced. It's much harder to eat through troops of other types, and they are losing that single advantage that they had. And that's not the only thing. There are plenty of others which we're also going to explore. Another huge thing in regards to this game are badges, and just like with any other troop types, there are also badges for bows, but this is where things become somewhat complicated, because bow badges are extremely difficult to get. Like any other health badges for infantry, cav, spear, bow badges you have to, or health badges you have to get through the Iron Bank, which is once a month with 200 black diamonds. So it excludes free-to-play players from actually going that direction at all. The another thing is that defense badges for bows you can only get in as Alliance Mobilization reward, or I believe as well in the coupon event. Can't remember what it's called, but you can get it there as well. But that also excludes free-to-play players, aside from those that are going with the rewards in AM for defensive bow badges. And what I believe is a huge thing in general is that bows do not have any Glorious Battle or KVK badges where you can get in the shop. These are the badges that are splitting the inf attack and inf defense, for example, for one troop into one badge, but halved the stats instead. And bows do not have badges for that. So essentially, other troop types can go for badges that are specific design for them, while bows can go 3: bow attack, bow defense, and bow health. But the bow defense and bow health ones are difficult to get, so it's hard for free-to-play players, for example, to get that. As well as if you want a force slot, then you're pretty much forced to either go total badges as a force slot if you want to fill it out, which means that bows once again lose out on stats, and the value of course becomes much more difficult. And it wasn't that huge of an issue because bows were just meant to be glass cannons. You focused everything in the attack and slaughtered everything based on with the high attack. But with tier 5, where troops have higher base defense compared to bows, and with the increased stats from infantry or from badges as well as weapons, you start feeling the difficulty by going bows. And other accounts are just going pure setups as well, mono inf, mono cav, mono spear, which makes it a lot difficult because one of the great points bows had were the fact that you could go mono on them and didn't have to fear any of the other ones. But because the stats have been inflated to such a point now that splitting up your stats into several troop types makes it a lot more difficult to actually win, then people are just making accounts based on one specific troop type instead, and then having several people with different troop types or with one specific troop type in the alliance, so you can rotate between them. And because of that, bows are falling off even more than what people would think at the beginning. So before finishing the video, we also have to kind of understand why bows were that strong for a year, roughly a year, before all these newer things were added. And of course the badges are nothing new. The badges have always been there, so the bows had always to fight against that disadvantage, but of course with the addition of weapons and new awakenings and so on coming into the game, bows are falling off. But the one thing that made up for the badge difference earlier was the fact that they were an Iron Defense 3. And the Iron Defense 3 had a bunch of things included, as well as the bow, weapon, health and defense upgrade. And these upgrades were quite considerable because it's 135%, which means that combined with the other ones, you get I believe it's a 270% stat total from research alone for bows, which the other research or other troop types didn't get. And on top of that, it was also the entire enhanced defense, which allowed bigger max defense troop types amount. And with that combined, it created this meta where people will just build their entire castle full bow, just stock it full with bows, and don't really care about who's going to attack you, because there are so many bows inside your castle that even a solo would just nuke the other guy. Even rallies would be questionable at times because you have such a huge troop advantage, and that made bow become nearly impossible to deal with for roughly a year. 135% is a lot. It's the equivalent of six and a half, or roughly 6.5 badges. So offensively, which was the strongest point for bows, you would be behind compared to bows, and defensively, or defense and health wise, you would have to get 6.5 badges each for each stat to make up for the difference. But bows could also get defense and health badges, although difficult, they could still get it. And that basically meant that on an even state at that time, which bows had, all the troop types would just lose out against bows because bows were that much stronger. And of course, bows also had decent synergies and decent ways to deal with things. Crowers was one of them, which allowed 20% chance for extra additional attacking. Then there was, I believe, Melisandre as well, which ignited bow attacks, which gave 10% additional damage, which is also one of the strongest parts you have. Then you had Theon, which had the total health stats already and pretty much got a huge increase to offensive stats because it has both total attack and bow attack in Awakening, which is once again the strongest point of both. So you had a bunch of commanders that also synergized well, which weren't super difficult to get because you could get the Melisandre fairly cheaply through deals in the game. You can get Theon even as a free-to-play player slowly through the dice event. You had other commanders you could go, for example, even free-to-play. Sheila had 50% bow attack as the Awakening introduced as well, and has bow attack as an extra additional buff, just as commander passive buff. So there were a lot of points in terms of offensive power. There were a lot of offensive buffs in the game, which made it really difficult to contest bows. I believe bows for a long time had probably the highest baseline totals in the game for roughly a year, and that just changed the entire meta in the game towards bows. But now with the addition of newer synergies, spear synergy with the weakness attack, cavalry synergy with active army skills, infantry synergy with extra hits and so on, makes bows starting to fall off. And then the addition of the weapons, which give both offensive and defensive stats to other troop types, the badges that are there, the T5 troops, which have a higher defensive buff compared to bows, and also have some research increases for the other troop types as well, just meant that bows are just really difficult to use now because they have a really hard time getting the defensive stats for it, and the one thing that they were good at, which was the offensive power, just ends up falling off. And with all the research and everything done, they have a higher BR now as well, so it's much easier to invade kingdoms that have these high research castles, and overall bows are, in my opinion, slowly falling off unless something drastically changes in the game, some insane awakenings get added. And that's just the nature of this game. The metas change, and maybe in a year bows will be coming back again, who knows. But that's kind of my take on the entire discussion with bows versus other troop types. I hope you liked the video. It's a little bit different from what I normally do, and I might make more of these types of video in the future. But yeah, like and comment if you want to, subscribe to the channel if you're new and want to follow up on more videos regarding Game of Thrones and other games possibly in the future. If you want to play the game, there's going to be a link down in the description below, as it is for the Game of Thrones Discord group. And you are always welcome to write to me if you have questions or anything, and that's going to be it for me this day. We soon have a new event on War coming, and I hope I can give you an update in that regard soon as well. So take care, guys. Bye bye.